Hi there, and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now, you've just seen one of my most recent acquisitions, and I bet you probably guessed who is the manufacturer behind this absolutely stunning locomotive. So yes, it is a Sutton Locomotive Workshops Class 24. Now, it's not a new item because I don't often buy new items because they're just far too expensive. I managed to find this second hand but in exceptionally good condition and sound fitted as well, and it is an absolute dream of a locomotive. So at the end of this video I have an extended clip of this Class 24 manoeuvring through the depot for anyone who is interested. So a couple of items on the list for this video. We continue on with the extension series of the layout, and I have now completed the engine shed / depot area, which more or less sort of replaces the depot from the original layout. So we'll run through some of the processes I went through to develop this particular area. So I do make some reference to previous episodes in this series in terms of the construction methods used, and also in terms of the point motor wiring. There is also other videos that I've done for that as well, so I haven't elaborated too much in this particular video. And also, after I've covered this particular area of the layout extension, I also had some very exciting news for our New Zealand audience. So stay tuned for that towards the end of this video, and I will explain more. So I think without further ado, we'll just hop into what I've been doing in this most recent part of the layout extension. So the area in question is the space between the fiddle yard and the curved main lines on the left. Now, I've left this area open up until this point because it certainly made it easier to access certain parts, particularly when it came to wiring up the fiddle yard. So this area here is reserved for the original engine shed or / TMD that used to sort of be roughly in that area, but there's going to be a bit of a reconfiguration of the track. So the idea is that the ground level where the curved main lines are will extend out a little bit further, but not all the way through to where the fiddle yard is. So this upper area will go roughly about as far as where I've placed this batten, and I've got a ruler leaning up there which is sort of indicating a rough idea of a sloped embankment that will run down towards the lower scenic section of the fiddle yard. So the first thing to do really is construct some framework that is going to go into this area, and of course this is the split between two sections of the layout, so the new framework is going to be built to work with those two sections so that if in the future I need to dismantle this layout, they will come apart easily. So this is the first half of the framework that I've assembled, and it's basically mimicking the framework that went underneath where the curved main lines are, in which way that creates a nice level surface and matches up the track substrate as well. And as per what I've done in previous areas of the layout, I make up a cardboard template of the actual baseboard or track substrate, so I can get a perfect match of the dimensions and the size when cutting this out of the MDF or ply. So that's how it's looking. Of course, this section here, which is part of the original layout, the substrate is a 6mm MDF, and I really need it to match, so it is basically a continuation of that particular material. And then on the extension side of the layout, I introduced ply in as a substrate as opposed to the MDF, and so hence the material has changed because the thickness of the ply is slightly deeper, and that has meant also the framework is slightly different as well. So if you go back to some of the earlier videos in this series, you'll see where I've explained the change in substrate materials. So you can begin to sort of see here the step down to the fiddle yard, that the idea there is that will be some form of sloped embankment. There may be a very short sort of retaining wall down by the fiddle yard track, and then it'll slope up towards the upper level. So the next step was laying out some track and getting an optimized sort of layout for the engine shed location, and I sort of found that this worked out to be the best configuration. So here I've just laid down some track loosely, it's not pinned down or anything, and based on the space restrictions that we sort of have in this area, I decided to go with a 3-way point. So in the meantime, I have just printed out a plan PDF of a Pico 3-way point at 100%, so that I can get a close enough idea of how the track is going to be laid out. So the next step, of course, was to actually purchase one of these points and then also figure out the wiring and so forth for the point control and also the track power. So the first hurdle was actually dealing with this 3-way point, which incidentally actually turned out to be not quite as complicated as what I thought it would have been. So as you can see, we've got our 2-point motors, and then we've also got our 2 frog switches as well. So this is a electro frog 3-way point, and it is sort of more or less already wired up. There is no snipping and cutting of rails in order to get this to work. So one of the things I really had to factor in when I was laying out this track was, of course, the 2-point motors take up a lot more room, and so we really had to consider how much space we had available and making sure and avoiding any beams or struts that are underneath the baseboard. So what I'd actually done, and this is a photocopy of the point after I bought it, but before I did actually anything to it. So I photocopied the base of the point, so we got a true representation to scale of the point, and then marked out where holes would need to be in the baseboard to accommodate the point motors, and also actually the wires for the frogs, plus also the power supply as well. So once I'd worked that out, it was just simply a case of cutting out the shape of the point out of the paperwork, cutting out the holes that represent the holes that would be cut into the baseboard, and placing that over where I'd temporarily laid the track. And as you can see, there's some pencil markings there that indicate the outline of the tie bars on the actual point itself, where the point motors are actually located. And of course the hole for the point motors is larger than what is needed, just to make sure that all the wiring and any other bits that sort of protrude out will actually fit snugly through the hole. And as you can see, I positioned the point so that it's also not near any beams as well. And also the wee small square rectangle up at the top is of course where the frog wires and also the track power will connect through. And that is the areas marked out, which can now have the holes cut in the baseboard. So it's quite important, I find, to label the wires that come out of the point motor so that we know which wire corresponds to which track control. So once all the wiring is set up for the point motors and the holes were cut in the baseboard, we were able to set up the track configuration and fix it down in a more permanent manner. So the next step is to set up a control panel for this particular area, but there's also some other points nearby which will also be part of the same control panel. So we'll just take a closer look at what I've worked on so far. So you would have seen in there the three-way point with the motors and frog switches set up. Now there is a link in the top corner there that refers to a previous video where I went about setting up a normal standard point, but essentially the same principles apply. So in terms of the control panel, this is yet to be fully completed in terms of wiring it up. So this is the actual panel itself, and there is a link in the top corner that's also referring back to a previous video about how I sort of went about making these panels. This is my lunchbox control panel, and it is a simple case of being able to wire up the inside of the panel and to also have access from time to time. So you'll see here that we have kind of a variation between push buttons and switches. So the switches are a double throw center return. So flicking it one way, it returns back to the center. This is basically controlling a point for either left or right operation as a control directly for the point motor as such. A push button really is more like a route selection or track selection method. So by pushing this button, you're going to select this track. By pushing that button, you'll select the other track, and that of course is going to control a portion of the three-way point. The same goes for these crossover sections in here, where crossovers run between two parallel tracks. So pushing this button activates that crossover track, thus therefore operating both points simultaneously in that situation. You'll have to ignore the green masking tape that is currently stuck over this at the moment. This is just temporary while I am actually labeling everything. So on the actual bus here for this, we have labels for every single point, and then these terminal blocks of course are the pluggable terminal blocks, so I can detach this whole thing, which this would actually be mounted up under the baseboard and go in the same place next to the control panel that is doing the fiddle yard. So that's where we're at with the control panel. So now on to some very exciting news for our model railway folk here in New Zealand, and possibly even Australia, and well, possibly even the UK and even America, or anywhere else for that matter. Here in New Zealand, we are having our next National Model Railway Convention here in Christchurch. Now, the interesting thing is it originally was actually planned for last year, and unfortunately, due to COVID, it had to be postponed. So the convention is now being rescheduled for April 2022. So we are roughly basically a year away from it actually taking place, and who knows, maybe in a year's time it might be a bit easier to travel around the world, and thus maybe people from other parts of the globe might be able to attend the convention. So I have actually become involved in the next convention, and this is by way of designing their new website and also actually looking after their Facebook page as well. So for all of you who are based here in New Zealand and you want to know more about the next convention in 2022, head over to the Facebook page and the website, and there are links in the description below to both of those where you can get a taste of what is about to come to us next year. Now, we are a year out, so there isn't a huge amount of information there just yet, but as the year progresses, of course, more details and more information will actually be available. And probably the best way to actually keep up to date with the new information that will be added is to like or follow the Facebook page. So there we have it for this episode here at Station Road. I'll leave you with this extended running session of depot movements of the Class 24 for you to enjoy. Take care everyone, look after yourselves, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.
Bye.